Should I stop talking? No, all right. You're live on both. Hi, my name's Dan DeBaun. I'm the CEO of DefenderShield. Today I'm here to chat about controversial questions, maybe misunderstandings in the electromagnetic radiation space. A little bit of history. I worked for Bell Labs many years ago in AT&T. I started DefenderShield 10 years ago, along with my son, and we started developing products for the marketplace, as well as my son and I wrote a book, Radiation Nation. So we're here today to talk about the subjects you would like to chat about. You can ask questions, text us the question, and I'll try to, in real time, answer all your questions. So without further ado, let's start. I don't have questions yet, so let's. There's been a lot of change in recent years in the electromagnetic radiation space. There's a lot of discussion about 5G, for example, that really didn't exist only just a year or two ago, because we have the 5G being deployed in our environment, and we really don't know what the ultimate impact is to our health. In fact, there's been no study work, research work, giving us a better understanding of what happens at the higher millimeter rates that are typically associated with 5G. It turns out a lot of stuff that's been deployed in 5G that you hear about is really all about the way they deployed technology first in 5G, and it's all in the same space as much of the other 4G and previous generations. 5G has additional frequency rates above the standard electromagnetic radiation space of the 4G up to the 2360 gigahertz space, and that's where a lot of the controversy lies. So we have our first question from one of the listeners, and what is a realistic way to protect myself from electromagnetic radiation? It's very simple, actually. Electromagnetic radiation, when it's really touching your body, that's when it's probably the most dangerous. But when you move it away, even 1 to 2 foot away, like 80% of the danger is gone. If you go 4 foot away, up to 98% of the danger is gone. So the distance is a very good way of protecting yourself. Other ways of doing it is by simply reducing the time window that you use technology. For example, if you use a cell phone, when you use it for an hour, that could be potentially dangerous. If you use it for a couple of minutes, it's much more likely there's going to be less impact into your body. So just the duration of time and technology helps. And of course, there's shielding itself. You can find ways of stopping the signal going towards the body, and there's a lot of technology to do that. So time, duration, distance, and shielding, the three simple ways of trying to protect yourself from electromagnetic radiation. So thanks, Asa, for asking that question. We're waiting for other questions now, and while we wait, I'd like to chat a little bit about the standards in the electromagnetic radiation space. Standards are 35 years old, and there's been controversy in the health community along with the standards bodies about really how potentially outdated the technology standards are. The stuff I actually used to do in the Bell system when I worked for Bell Labs, I actually helped develop the standards that were for protection of the users. And so today, if you think about it, the standards of 35 years ago really don't actually apply today. So there's a lot of controversy about it, including the FCC being brought to court by informed scientists about the issues that potentially exist. What items should you be worrying about? Electromagnetic radiation is all around us, but where are the sources for that kind of stuff? Well, if you think about it, your cell phone is one source. Well, rather, it's three sources. It has the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, and the cellular connection. So there's three sources just from your cell phone. Your tablet, your laptop. All these devices use either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth to communicate with some other foreign device. So all of the modern technologies we have around us are typically emitting the electromagnetic radiation that can potentially be harmful. Here's an interesting question that we just received, and it's like, when you hide behind a wall, are you safe? This is a simple way to answer that is like, if you're next to a brick wall with your cell phone, and you're actually using that cell phone to connect to a tower on the other side of the cell tower on the other side of the wall, and it's communicating, that means the invisible electromagnetic radiation itself has penetrated the concrete. So the fact are, the walls, barriers can potentially shield, but most likely they don't. So you're not really better protected when you're inside a building any more than you are outside. So we have another question. How much electromagnetic frequency radiation are we experiencing on a daily basis? That's a wonderful question. And the way I like to answer it is by talking about contrast. If we look 10 years ago, none of us really had laptops, tablets, cell phones, these smart devices around our wrists that are using Bluetooth communications. All of these devices really didn't exist but for the last 10 or 15 years around our device. So I've heard some scientific experts talk about it's orders of magnitude more, trillion times greater. We didn't have it in our space not very long ago, but today it's thousands of times greater in our environment than ever before. That's it. Here's the next question I just received from one of the listeners. How exactly do the DefenderShield products block electromagnetic radiation? When my son and I started DefenderShield, what we did was we went out and looked for technology that we could combine to eliminate all forms of electromagnetic radiation. So what our products do is conduct, absorb, and throw off small amounts of thermal conversion. And so we have technologies that doesn't draw more than it should, doesn't draw less than it should. It basically operates at the same rate of the transmission. So we don't harm the signal in any way. We just prevent the signal from passing through. As a side note, with 5G, by the way, that's very different. The speeds of the 5G are going up into the gigahertz range, as I mentioned before, and as a result of that, we've had to develop new technology that actually ups the shielding capacity to sort of the same function, but at very much higher rates that haven't existed in the marketplace. New question just came. Why hasn't EMF radiation been more regulated? Actually, in our introduction, we spoke about that. And as a corollary to that question is, why haven't there been more testing on effects of humans? That's the heart of the 5G question, actually. Regulation occurred, as I said, 30 some odd years ago, on technology 30 some odd years ago. And we've learned a lot about the impacts to the human body. But those standards were done so many years ago that the parameters around the impacts to the human body were very much not understood very well. If you think about today, we have it all around us all the time, is very different than 30 years ago, and we spoke about that. With that technology up to 4G, it really has been the case that we have done a lot of research. And there's a controversy by some scientists that say it is a human problem and it does impact the cells of the body and the human behavior of the body. And some say there's none. So there's that controversy. But in fact, it's pretty clear, and it's based on science, that there's this controversy. What's now occurring with the 5G is there is literally no study work, research work. We do not know what the ultimate impact will be to the electromagnetic radiation being transmitted from the cell tower or the small cell site right in front of our home. There just simply has not. And all we can speculate is we know what's happened in the past and how the tingling, the foggy, our foggy thinking, the behavioral issues, all those kinds of things we know about 4G are likely to be the same kind of body response in 5G. But maybe even more, because the strength of the signals of 5G in the higher rates, the way they're transmitting with the codec encoding of the messaging is more powerful than ever before. So we don't know much about it. Now, we have another question from Michelle. She'd like to know what's the best ways, the most effective ways to block your router. Great question, Michelle. What I actually like to tell everyone is just move it. Move it out of your environment. The farther away it is, and we spoke about distance before, the farther away it is, the better off you are. Put it in locations farthest from the living area. Put it in your garage. You will get Wi-Fi access because Wi-Fi goes through walls. And so the most effective way to block it is by moving it. You don't want to block it for purposes of communicating to it, because if you did, you wouldn't have Wi-Fi access. So best is move it out of your living area, and it's most likely the best thing you can do. We have another question. What are the EMF stickers or necklaces, or how do they work? These kinds of questions are complicated because in many ways, we really don't know from the manufacturer exactly how they work. So we really can't evaluate what they're doing. And in fact, in so many ways, I always suggest, if you are going to be thinking about necklaces or stickers or any of those kinds of things, make sure they went to research labs that had the capacity to ensure the integrity of the claims being made by the vendor. The best way I can say is they may work, but you really, as an individual consumer, need to make sure it works from an independent third party. We have another question. EMF radiation emitted from electric and water meters in and around the house. If so, how do I block it? So there are extremely low frequency emissions being released by the electronics and the meters around your house. And I tend not to worry about that so much, because most of the time they terminate on the garage. They terminate in front of the house. In other words, they're a distance away from your living. And so is there a need to block it? Not necessarily. But there are some products that claim that they can block it. And again, make sure if they do make that claim, there's evidence from independent study work that says it does it. But in general, I don't think you need it. Does the severity of EMF radiation fluctuate between different people? Absolutely. This is a really important question. One of the things that has happened in the marketplace that we know about is that as we began introducing the technology into our environment over the last 10 years or so, so has electromagnetic radiation hypersensitivity. In other words, more and more and more of us are feeling stuff going on in our bodies, and the feelings are not going away as rapidly as they used to. They're not as temporary as they used to. That's called EHS, electromagnetic hypersensitivity. That's happening in our environment, and it turns out that it can be just a headache. It can be just tingling fingers. As an aggregate, we know that the population that has electric hypersensitivity is growing from 10, 15, up to 20%, and it's continuing to grow. And by the way, largely 80% of it, in fact, of that population is women. How detrimental is electromagnetic radiation to the body and mind? We work with a clinic, and they deal with electro hypersensitive. They deal with the extreme cases. How extreme can it get? Well, it can get very debilitating to your lifestyle. In fact, I recall that in one case, a young man had been exposed to electronics in his working adult career, was so much exposed that he literally couldn't walk. He was brought in on a wheelchair into the clinic, and he had difficulty actually just doing daily chores. It had become so debilitating. Now, I'm not saying everyone's like that. What I'm saying is that as electromagnetic hypersensitivity enters into your personal life, don't discount it. It likely gets worse, and it can even get so debilitating while you're in a wheelchair. How about making EMF stickers for your cell phone instead of your cell phone cases? Aren't stickers more affordable? When you have a sticker and you put it on your telephone, whether you have it on the case itself or you have it on the phone itself, there's a question of where it should be. There shouldn't be any. There's no real difference in the space. The stickers are very, very more affordable, but there are claims they make. For example, some of them claim they change the signal in a way that it doesn't hurt the individual. Well, from a technology point of view, if you modulate or change the modulation or the frequency rates or any of the characteristics of the electromagnetic radiation to the cell tower, you won't communicate. So there is a legitimate scientific question about how accurate it can really be. So you're not spending much for it, but it may not be doing very much as well. Again, look for independent study on stickers or any of those kinds of devices to make sure it does what you need to do. Well, here's another question. Are there different health risks for EMF radiation depending on the device that emits it? I was actually talking with a colleague the other day, and we were chatting about emissions from various devices and what there are differences with the strength of the signal of one against the strength of a signal of another. A cell phone, for example, is 1.6 watts per kilogram. You can actually find cell phones that generate 1.4 watts per kilogram. And so you would think that .2 difference in the power levels of that device actually is better for you. Well, it turns out that that's not necessarily true. It's a bag of worms, because it really depends on how the body responds to it, and phones modulate based on location, distance from the cell phone, So there's a lot of those kinds of things that impact the changing amplitude of the signal. But by and large, science really doesn't see the difference between 1.4 or 1.6. In fact, we know that a frontal lobe cell cancer, a cell, actually can be mutated at 0.1 watts. That means it's 15 times less power level than a standard cell phone at 1.6 watts. So there's no real serious benefit from choosing one or the other, and certainly science hasn't differentiated any benefits. All right. What about making EMF stickers for your cell phone instead? No, let me see. Next question. Are there different health risks for EMF depending on the device that emits it? No, there is no difference with electromagnetic radiation depending on the device. The device is issuing or transmitting a signal to the human body, and the human body itself is responding. The gamut of response depends on the individual, not the device. The individual may feel tired. The individual may have a problem with clarity of thinking. There are many symptoms that may occur, and oftentimes they're individual. It's how it responds to the individual. In fact, as a general way of thinking about this, this technology has not been around very long. And so our human body hasn't found a way of dealing with this considered toxin. Electromagnetic radiation is considered a toxin. It's an external environmental toxin, just like chemicals in the air. If you have a gas can and it's sitting in the middle of the room and there are fumes, that's an environmental toxin. And when you breathe that in, it's a volatile organic compound. That is, it's a chemical that's getting into your body and your body responds. Multiple chemical sensitivity typically is a result of it. Similar to electromagnetic radiation, multiple chemical sensitivity is where you respond to that environmental stimulus. Well, it turns out electromagnetic radiation is the same. The body's responding to that stimulus because it's physically there, and the body's learning how to deal with it. So we really haven't gotten to the point where there is enough evolution in our the body evolution where we've learned how to deal with these emissions or these toxins in our environment, and now we're trying to figure out what that is and what we can do about it in the meantime. All right, so we have a little break, no questions. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of the things you may be able to do with your laptop computer, and are they safe to use? Headsets with a laptop computer, is it safe to use? Well, let's think of it. Let's think it through. When you have a device, any device that's close to your body, that's where there's potential for the most harm. And we've spoke about that so far. So when you take that device far away, let's say like a cell phone, and you put that cell phone in your hand and you use speakerphone, that's much better than that cell phone touching your head. And so that distance is enough to keep you safe. Well, when you use headsets, that is somewhere in the middle of that. There's actually a little electrical current running through there in the wires, and so it's much better than on your head, but it's not the same as when you have it arm's length from you. So it's much better than the head, but it does represent a danger. There are technologies out there actually where they do a conversion of the technology for speakers, and they convert it to an acoustical link between the headset, which becomes acoustical, and the ears. Those are the best and most safe. And so if you're going to use a headset-like device with your laptop, it's safer. But if you can, find one that's acoustical links. It has tubes rather than wires. Okay, we have another question from the listening audience. Several companies are offering cell phone cases and other products as EMF protected products. But how do we know which one of these provide good protection? And the answer is you don't. And more importantly, they vary. There are some companies that have shielding, they claim to have shielding protection, and they have extremely weak shielding within their devices for the protection that they claim. Others, they may have very good, and we've seen one or two that really are very good. What's interesting about those is that they make a claim, and of course all these kind of products, if these claims are being made, really the question is, how do we know? And as a consumer, we really don't know. We need to find ways of making sure what we're buying is going to work, and the only way to do that, as I've said time and time again, look for independent research study on the device and make sure that the claim they're making is legitimate. Okay. We were talking about electro hypersensitivity and the growth. Electro hypersensitivity, as I've mentioned, is growing more and more and more. We see more and more people that have concussion-like symptoms. They appear to have externally symptoms that as if they had a concussion. In part, that's true because the electromagnetic exposure does break down the blood-brain barrier of the brain, and as a result, there can be more penetration of electromagnetic radiation signals into the brain. And so what we know is that when that occurs, there are likely electrohypersensitive, a little bit more than most of us, but the symptoms they have mimic symptoms that we know a lot about, concussion-like symptoms. We also know, by the way, and I've been talking about the brain itself. Let me talk a little bit about other parts of the body. We know that there's been accumulation of minerals in the body under certain circumstances that actually does heighten electric hypersensitivity, and those kinds of things are growing in the kinds of exposures we have for the minerals around our lives. Finally, what we've noticed is that the gut itself is being influenced. We know that the gut actually does well with exposures from electromagnetic radiation. In fact, bugs, the bacteria and virus, they actually propagate at an accelerated rate under certain circumstances. And at the same time, electromagnetic radiation is suppressing your immune. And of course, the gut is such a important part of that. And so we're now seeing patterns of change in our gut. The biome of our gut is really literally talking about impacts to the body. Okay, so let's try to get some more questions answered here. It's a new question. What is a good EMF detector in your opinion? I actually don't have a preference. What I can tell you is most of the devices that are on the market that are below $150 or so. They're very uncalibrated, and you may use it to go measure something, and it may show as really a serious problem, and it really may not very well be. So you really want to try to get the more expensive, which is better built and better synchronized or calibrated to make sure that if you buy it. But in general, I always suggest you don't really need a meter if you're aware of your environment. Think about all the sources that can be around you that could be potentially influencing your immediate environment, your living room. What are the sources within the living room, within the bedroom, within the dining room that could actually be influencing you? And so if you are diligent about turning those devices off or using distance to protect yourself, you don't need meters to tell you you're protected. If you do, try to get the more expensive because they're more accurate. And they're better able to characterize your environment that you're living in. Okay, we just had a new question asked, and the question is, if you use DefenderShield blanket under the iPad while sitting, will it protect you from electromagnetic frequency? And the answer is, all of when we talk about our environment, we talk about the ambient, everything in the room. And so when you take a DefenderShield blanket and you put it over yourself, you're basically protecting from the ambient in the room and the devices close to your body. So it does protect you from electromagnetic radiation. There potentially can be electromagnetic radiation from underneath you, but you're relatively close to the floor, and as a result, that's not typically the source for the ambient in the room or the device transmission. So the blankets do really provide a wonderful protection, particularly for electric hypersensitive. We know we have a relationship with many in the marketplace, and there's one particular person we know. He won't travel without his DefenderShield blanket because it really does help him in the environments he goes into. When he travels on an airplane, in the airports, he's using the DefenderShield blanket to protect him while he's in those environments. So yes, it does protect you from electromagnetic fields. We have a new question. How do I protect EMF if I am working using my my work laptop? Okay. If you put that on your lap at work, you really should find shielding protection. However, most of the time, it's on a table. It's somewhat far away from you. So for most of us, you don't really need to protect yourself from the EMF from the laptop. To ensure you're minimizing exposures, think about this. Rather than using the Wi-Fi aspect of your laptop, why don't you use Ethernet wiring? Connect your Ethernet wire into the laptop, bring it to the wall, and you eliminate all the transmissions coming out of the laptop, which are the harmful emissions, the RF at radio frequency emissions at 2.4 gigahertz or 5.0 gigahertz, the typical kind of transmissions for Wi-Fi. So if you're at work and you put on your lap, my suggestion is try to find protection. If it's on your desk, you're probably pretty safe, and you can even be more safe if you connect it with the wiring. In fact, in general, you should always think about connecting all your devices that you use with Ethernet wiring, because every time you do it, you eliminate the Wi-Fi transmission into your room. potentially influencing you and your family. Okay, are there any books written in simple, non-technical language that explains EMF? Yes, there is a book that's been written that explains electromagnetic radiation and how you can help yourself. That was written by my son, Ryan, and myself. We co-own and co-created DefenderShield. What's interesting is we were frustrated that the research community knew so much about the potential dangers to the human body, and that so many didn't quite understand what it was that they should be worried about. We embarked on writing a book, Radiation Nation. And that book was written with not an engineering detail. Our goal was never to create something that was complicated and hard to understand. Our goal was to try to define simple terms that people could understand, even the lay people. You did not have a scientific background. You didn't have to have a biochemistry degree. We broke down sort of like what it is, what science knows about it, what kind of impact it's had on the human bodies, and we explained the things you can do to help minimize those potential dangers that could harm you. And so we wrote Radiation Nation, and that has been a book that's actually been a bestseller for the last few years. And it was written out of frustration. And hopefully it's been helpful for those who have read it. And I suggest for those who have not, to please take the time to find a copy if you're interested in this space, because we really do lay out what it is. I'll give you a good example. When you talk about electromagnetic radiation, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't hear it, but some of us feel it, and that's the electro hypersensitivity question. Is like it is something that is around us everywhere, but none of us knew about it. It turns out that in the book, to explain what electromagnetic radiation is, and I'll explain it now. It starts at a little from a device, a cell phone. At the very end of the cell phone, it starts transmitting. It's a little ball that grows bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it meets the cell site. And so here we go. We have all these balloons that are created in our environment, and it's hard to explain just exactly how they do that. Well, think of it like this. If you want to know how it goes out, think of it as watching the waves on the ocean. You can see there's cresting waves, and one wave goes by, the second goes by, the third goes by. Let's say a wave, 5 waves go by and it's over 1 second. That's 5 hertz of waves past you. When we talk about cell phones, they work at roughly 1 gigahertz, which is 1 billion waves that pass you in 1 second. And so we try to help ground sort of the question that you want answered in a way you understand it. And so that you'll find throughout. We don't use technical terms. We simply try to describe what it is so everyone understands it. And be honest with you, we really did write it for moms and grandmas. Turns out they're probably more concerned about our health than the dads are. So it's written for all of us. Okay, we just got another question. How can students protect themselves from electromagnetic radiation coming in from their laptops? They have to use Wi-Fi at their desks. Right. So this is an important question. What do you do to minimize exposures? So we've talked about distance. We've talked about time and duration. Here's a simple one. If you have a laptop and you're particularly concerned about electromagnetic radiation in your environment, there is several different ways to mitigate that. As I said, if you put it on your desk, it's not as bad as if you put it on your lap. So the very first thing you start doing is moving it away from you. Put it at your desk. And that reduces it. And as we spoke before, if you can connect to the Wi-Fi through an Ethernet, you certainly want to do that. Let's say you can't. What do? Well, the next thing is keep on moving it more away from you. Rather than using the keyboard, get a keyboard, an accessory keyboard, and plug it into the USB port, and use that to type on, and find a monitor that you can connect to. Monitors are very low these days with emissions, so you really do want to think about taking modern monitors today and move it a little bit away from you, and you're pretty safe. So there are a lot of things you can do to protect yourself as students, and it's gradual. You can do one thing that makes it better. You can do other things that even improves that. So think about how you do the time and distance and use the various tools that we just chatted about. Okay, we have a new question. I've heard an AM radio will go completely static when near a high level of EMS. Is that a good way to test areas for high emissions? Actually, so when you have a portable radio and you walk around and you have it at the lowest part of the dial, you are literally picking up extremely low frequency emissions. And if you go into a living room and you don't hear anything, and you have the radio on the low side, that means that in the center of the room, there is no extremely low frequency emissions that is being detected. Well, let's say you take that same radio and you walk against a wall that actually is powering up your lamps. It will go high. The reason why is because the electromagnetic radiation is being emitted off of the wiring, off of the electronics that you're using. So the fact is, an AM radio will pick up, and that's almost as good as a meter, because you'll hear the difference in the elevation of the static, and which is an indication of more emissions and less, depending on where it is. So that's a good question. I like it, and it's a simple way of making sure that you're minimizing dangers. What I like about the AM radio, by the way, is you can actually use it to try to understand your environment, not only in your house, but outside your house. When you have these high-level power lines in front of your home, they're emitting extremely low frequency emissions. So you're able to take that AM radio, which is an inexpensive thing to have, and you can detect the emissions from your environment that are surrounding you. So it's a really wonderful tool for doing that, and it's a good question because it's a simple way of identifying exposures in your environment. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about. We were talking before about the standards and the protection of the government in ensuring that we're now protected. Turns out that there is a standards body in the federal government, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and their job and responsibility is to ensure that they are current in providing standards to the industries that produce products and protect us from those products. So the Federal Communications Commission is empowered to sort of ensure the safety of the users of the technology in the U.S. marketplace. That's under controversy a little bit because when they approved 5G, 5G was something that was new. We didn't have much experience. They reviewed the evidence based on 30-year-old background detail, and they made choices. They made choices that said this should be okay. We have science and research experts that have contradict that position that the FCC has taken, and so that's where there's been a place of argument and controversy over the last few years. The FCC recently had Robert Kennedy and Dr. Deborah Davis debate at a Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court, about whether proper rules and regulations are followed for these new 5G devices. And so the Supreme Court now is in review. The best we can tell, based on what we saw at the hearing, which was their orals, was that the court was a bit concerned that maybe some of the protocol may not have been fully developed the way it should have been, and they may have been premature in making the choices about 5G. So that's where that controversy lies. Okay, we have another customer now. They have a question. Are there different products available to protect different parts of the body, like hands, heads, ears, eyes, other than just for cell phones? And the answer is yes, actually. It turns out that if you're going to have a device in your back pocket or in a pocketbook on your back pocket, you really want to be able to make sure that it's protected. And there are pouches and there are gloves. There are a variety of different technologies being applied to different applications for protection. And you really do need to. Some of us who are electric hypersensitive, they actually need it. I'm aware, for example, that some electric hypersensitive people can't even type on a keyboard, which is very, very low emissions. And they use gloves that shield them from the keyboard itself. And so you really want to think about those parts of the body that are being exposed and maybe how you can find protection from those kinds of products on the marketplace, specifically designed. For example, I'll give you another example. A tablet, they have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth emissions. And so if you're choosing that and putting it into your lap, you really want to find ways of minimizing the exposures directed towards your body. And there are devices that DefenderShield and others produce that are designed for those uses. They're designed to minimize that exposure when you're being exposed. So the answer to the question is there are ways of protecting different parts of the body, and you should look for ways of doing that and the vendors that offer those kinds of protection. Okay, we were talking, I'm going to go back to the FCC a little bit. One of the things that there was concern about by the Supreme Court was that they were not clear on where the evidence was that there was protection. They noted that the judges noted that the standards for somewhat 30 some odd years ago sort of didn't apply to uses today. We didn't have tablets. We didn't have portable laptops. All these new things in our marketplace actually are introducing different environments that we're living in. And so what they were wondering was, how did they conclude that with 5G integrated into all these technologies, their question was, how do we know that's safe? And when the FCC pointed to various sources, it seemed that there was maybe not quite sufficient set of information that was being offered to the FCC for them to make an intelligent decision about its impact to the human body. And so one of the real controversies were, the environment of 30 years ago is very different up today. And all the mobility that we all love and hold dear to our hearts is very different use than it was 30 years ago. In fact, I often talk about it in this way. When 30 years ago I had a cell phone, it was big and it was in the middle of my car and I had a wire to it. And I didn't have anybody to call. None of my friends had the cell phone at that time. And so my use with my new fancy device was very, very low use. So my exposures were minutes, not hours. Fast forward to today, some of us are what are considered heavy users from your competitors. So we now use it in very different ways, and that exposure is very different than 30 years ago. And that was what was being talked about with the FCC. It's funny, my son and I really try to provide the best information and shielding in the marketplace. Our goal is to provide the most advanced, and in fact, we have development groups that literally advance our technologies to keep pace with the technologies that are being faced with in the marketplace. And so there are differences between claims being made by some and us. We're dedicated to try to do the best we can to bring the maximum shielding capable, and that's not always the case with other manufacturers. So you really do want to do due diligence and look for someone, some group, some manufacturer that you can trust for bringing you the kind of protection you're looking for in you and your family. So competition is good in the marketplace, and some raise to the top, providing the best information and the best care and the design of the products to keep you protected, and some may not be as diligent at doing that. So I always recommend that you be diligent, and when you're choosing the vendor you're selecting for that protection, and that is a big difference. To that argument, by the way, I said we had development groups. We actually been working for probably 2 to 3 years now on developing shielding in the industry that no others have. And so what we've done is we anticipated up to 300 gigahertz, by the way, of the 5G space. And we knew that the technologies being applied by so many never would protect the users. So we actually entered into the development, and probably 4 months ago or so, we actually finalized our product development with new shielding that goes up to close to 100 gigahertz. that we call Ultra Armor. It's really, really important that that we evolve with the technologies that we're claiming we protect. And so where you see so many other competitors, they're not developers as we are. We actually spent a long time making sure that the technologies we applied into our shielding would be the kind of technology that does keep you safe. And we now call it Ultra Armor. Ultra Armor is like, we're just so excited about it because it really does help keep the users protected, even though the environment is changing with higher and higher transmission rates and introducing new toxins in our environment. We're trying to keep pace, and now we call it Ultra Armor, so which we're quite excited about. Let's see, do we have any other questions? No, it doesn't look like we do. So let me talk a little bit about the environment and our changing environment. We actually need to make sure that we keep ourselves protected. And we define the environment and understand the environment so we can do that. It turns out no one else is going to do that for you. So when you think about technology, electromagnetic radiation, new chemicals in our environment, all of these things introduce changes into our environment. And believe it or not, it takes typically years for standards bodies to evolve to the point where they bring that protection. Trans fats, for example. Trans fats were over 30 years old, and we used trans fats to cook French fries in. We wanted our French fries really, really crisp, and over 30 years ago, a lone biochemist said, it's not the hardening of our arteries that's killing us because of the eggs or the cholesterol we're eating. It's the trans fats we're using to cook the food in. And it took more than 30 years. It was banned outside the US, actually, sooner than it was banned in the US. But 2 years ago, it ultimately was banned. It took 30 years for us to know that that trans fat and the cooking oils we used were really the danger to the human body. So, in other words, if you use trans fats in that interim, you are a higher risk for some of the problems related to hardening of arteries and all sorts of stuff. So you're the architect of your own destiny, and you need to think about what you can do to try to protect yourself. It's in your hands. It's not in anyone else's. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm just really excited that we had a chance to chat a little bit today with you. I'm really hopeful that the things we spoke about is valuable to you, and you share this information, this video with your friends and your social media connections. We really do appreciate that. And our goal all along and always will be is to help inform and keep everyone as current as possible and on what's the technology and how to stay protected and safe from exposures. So those are the things that we control, and our mission is to inform. So you may choose to share our social media. You may also look for, we have a blog and a learning section that we try to keep up to date as much as possible on DefenderShield as a source of learning. For example, I was talking with an individual the other day, and they were asking me about 5G. And it's a fairly complicated subject area, and I glanced over it today. But 5G is really complicated. We have like 5 or 6 pages that all it does is describe what 5G is, and more importantly, what 5G is not. there's so much misconception of what 5G is. We just try to help clarify that by trying to keep current with that kind of information. So we very much want to continue informing you and feel comfortable coming for that kind of information for us. So in sum, thank you so much for visiting. Share on social media what we do. This is important stuff for you and your friends to know. And this is Dan DeBaun from DefenderShield, and thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate you taking the time today to listen to the discussions we had. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Did you end it?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you hit end?
Yeah, like close it out.
Oh, you closed it out. What?
No, I got out of the browser.
I got it. Here we go.
So I wasn't getting questions, so I was rambling. Well, I was watching time. Turn it up and then